So we're going to be using Core Framework alongside Bricks Builder for this video, and this is very much aimed at just an introduction to combining these two tools together. I'll give you an overview of some of the basic things you can do just to get your ideas kind of flowing, and then if you'd like me to cover things in more details, maybe with a project, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll take a look if there's enough interest. Now we're going to be using Core Framework alongside the Bricks add-on. And effectively, if we go to the marketplace, the Bricks add-on allows us to integrate the Core Framework with Bricks natively. So we get a little bit more functionality, makes it working with it just a little bit easier. But you absolutely do not need to have this particular integration plugin. You can just as easily copy everything from within the Core Framework website and use that for free inside your Bricks projects. To access this, all you need to do is open the web app up. You may need to create a free account, and then you can open it in the editor, and this will give you exactly the same options that we have inside the Bricks Builder integration, with the exception of maybe a couple of Bricks orientated functions. But you can do pretty much everything you need inside here. But we're going to concentrate, like I say, on the Bricks integration version. So once you install the plugin, you'll see this is what you get, which is basically identical. But like I say, we've got a couple of other options. Bricks, because we've got that integrated. And also we've got the preferences option with the add-ons that gives us some more options that are specific to Bricks. Okay, so let's take a quick look at those first, because there's some things we need to set up before we start using this. Come into preferences, and there's two things I want to draw your attention to: the root font size and the maximum screen width. The root font size is set by default to 62.5%, and that effectively means that all our values are based on 10 pixels as their base value. Now, there's reasons why you may not want to use this, but I will leave this set by default for now, and we'll take a look at this in future videos, the implications this has. But you can change it between 100% and 62.5%. 100% means everything is based on 16 pixels, the root value. The other one I want to draw your attention to is the max screen width. You can see mine is set to 1366, and we need to make sure that what we've set up inside here is exactly the same in our project in Bricks. So let's go and take a look at how we set that up, just to make sure everything is right. Just create any page inside Bricks Builder, come over to the settings section, and inside there choose theme styles. You may need to create a theme style from here. That's very simple. You simply type in the name and hit the plus, and it will then add that in. And then we can set a condition to make sure this is applicable to the entire website, or sections of the website or the page, whatever you're working on. The entire website just means this will always be applied. With that being said, we need to come in and choose the element container. And from there, we're going to come to the width section and make sure that we have exactly the same value inside there. This means when we add a container into our design, it's always going to be 1366 pixels wide. Let me just demonstrate what I'm talking about. If we add a section which will contain a container, that container will be 1366 pixels wide. Simple as that. That's all it means. You'll also want to do things like set up your typography inside here. We don't set up the typography inside Core Framework. So all you need to do is set the font that you want to use, the font family, all the basic options inside there. You can see I'm using Barlow, set to 400 and so on. So you set those basics up inside there, and then we can basically forget everything inside this section. So we don't need to worry about the settings. We're going to control most of this in the Core Framework. Then all we need to do is hit save to commit those changes, and we are on the road to success. Now, before moving on, here's a quick message from today's video sponsor, Hostinger. Kickstart your WordPress journey with Hostinger's high-performance hosting solutions and 24/7 chat support. You can ensure your site shines bright with plans to suit every need. Plans include free SSL, free domain, a supercharged CDN, and automated backups. Plus, you can experiment safely with their WordPress staging tools, back up with a click, and let their WordPress AI help you out where needed. With prices from just $2.59 per month. Now discover more via the link in the description below. With Hostinger, find the perfect plan for you today. Okay, so let's come back to the Core Framework. Let's take a quick look at the interface and what's going on here. You can see if we take a look at the left-hand side, things are broken down into logical groupings. Our colors, typography, spacing, components, layouts, and so on. Our colors, as you can see, allows us to create colors, and we can also set various different things up based upon breakpoints. So you can see we've got all breakpoints, and we've got various different breakpoints. So if we create in our own kind of layout options for things like grids and things like that, you can set things up to be different and work across those different breakpoints, which is pretty cool. We're going to leave it as it is because we're going to basically use pretty much everything that we have set up as part of the Core Framework because it's already a pretty solid starting point. But let's start off with the colors. By default, we get these 3 brand colors. And if we open things up, inside there, we've got a lot more options to customize those brand colors, which will automatically integrate with the color system inside Bricks Builder. You can see we've got this set as the primary, and we can generate our utility classes for text, background, and borders. And you'll notice if we hover over anything inside here, it will tell us what these mean. We can, if we want to, disable these by simply clicking on them, and it will turn them off. Click on them again to enable them. If you want to have a site that uses dark mode, you can enable that option inside here. You can select it, and you can see we now get options to create dark mode colors, so we can easily switch back and forth. And you have a little element inside the core framework when you're using this to be able to have that simple switch wherever you want it. For this example, we're going to turn that off. If you want to work with transparent variations of your colors, you can do that here as well, and this will automatically generate those. You can see we select it, and we'll have those created automatically. Underneath, you can see then we have our shades. Now you can see by this one, we've got 9 different shades that are going to be darker and 9 different tints that are going to be lighter. This is great when you want to work with colors and you want to have various different shades being used. You can auto-generate, and you can easily set the number of values you want inside here. You can keep it pretty limited with 2 or 3, or bump it up to something like 9 so you get a lot of color shade options and tint options. And then if we go back up to the top, you can see this is where we select our color value, and we get a nice little simple color picker, or we can use our colors that we transition over from our style guides. You'll also notice that we can change the format that the color is going to be referenced from hexadecimal to RGB, RGB with alpha, HSL, and so on. And selecting these, you can see it will give us the value of that particular color. You can select another one like RGB alpha, and you can see that shows us the values inside there. Choose whatever works the best for you. You also see we've got these little 3 little dots. If we click on these, you can see we can do other things. There's a kind of context menu, so we could duplicate, move up or down, and so on. All pretty simple. So let's close this one down. Let's say we don't need secondary and tertiary brand colors. We can easily click on those 3 dots and choose to delete. Say yes, we're sure. And the same again, we can choose to delete this. And okay, say sure. If you want to add another one in, you can simply click the little plus underneath any of these, and you can see that gives us our color preview. We can choose our color, adjust our alpha, give it a name, set any value we want inside here, and again choose from any of these options and drop this down, and we can set all those same options that we saw in the primary. For now, let's just get rid of this. Then you've got your options for things like your background, your text, your base, your neutral, your status colors, and so on. And you can easily create new color groups if you want more than what's available here. And you can get rid of groups as well. So you may not want this base, click the 3 dots and choose to delete it, paste it, copy it. You kind of get the idea. It's pretty simple and self-explanatory. So that's the effective color section. Typography is a little bit more kind of feature rich. Inside here, we can set things up like our fluid typography. Now, obviously, fluid typography means that as we scale things, things just look a lot nicer. You can set your minimum font value. You can use the scale ratio that you want, and there's a range of different scale ratios. Each of these, as they go up the scale, the differences between the smallest or the minimum and the maximum will increase. So you can see if we select this, you can see it gets bigger. We choose this one, go higher, it gets bigger again. So it comes down to what you want to set up inside here. We're going to set this to be something like perfect fourths, and you see we can set our minimum and our maximum in a pixel value. So don't worry about that. This is just using this to work out the scaling of our typography. Then you can see you can set the max scale, your minimum scale, your base scale index, which is M for medium. So whenever you choose something like your text size M, that's where you're sort of taking that initial value, that 16 pixel value, whatever the kind of variation of it is. Your naming convention, this is what's going to be used as part of the overall framework. So you can set this up to be whatever you want. If you have a naming convention you prefer, just change it from text and put what you want inside there. Pretty cool and easy. And you can see if we come down, we can say font size classes. So generate those. You can set up your headings. And now, let me just explain what's going on here. You'll see these are all using these kind of variables. So your text XS, text S, medium, and so on. And you can see this is highlighted as your base. If you come down underneath and you look at your headings, these are using variables. And these variables are basically what we've got inside here. The beauty of this is if we change this initial text value, any of these values, because these using our variables, they will change accordingly. So everything will flow down through our overall framework. It's pretty cool. And once you get used to this, it becomes incredibly powerful and just a great way of being able to very quickly change everything on your site by making simple changes inside your framework. Pretty cool. Now if we take a look at our line heights, you can see these are set up inside there, and if we want to set our text modifiers, things like bold, italic and so on, you can see we've got these inside here as well, and your alignments. And you can create selector groups and create variable groups. I'm going to leave those for another video. We take a look at that in a little bit more detail. It's more than we need inside here right now. Jumping into spacing, you can see this works in very much the same way as we saw with the typography. We've got our minimum size, which is again pixels, the same scale ratio, and the maximum size using again the scale ratio. And we can set up our base scale value, which is our medium, and also the naming convention in this case is space. And you see we get a visual representation of what these would look like on a desktop and what they look like on a mobile. So we can visually see the differences in size. And again, this is all scalable. If you want to create gap classes, margin and padding classes, these will be created inside here. And again, we can create selectors and variable groups should we need them. Now, jumping into components, this is where things are a little bit different. Components are effectively individual little pre-styled elements. So buttons, badges, things like that. So you can use the framework to create these. And if we say, for example, this button, we can select and edit this. And you can see we've got all these classes being applied to the button. And you can see we're using variables where variables make sense, and we're also using content and stuff in other places. And we can add more on here if we want to. We can click add a new property in, so we can change any of our properties here, and we can change the values. And again, we can reference those variable values. We don't want to use it, click on the X to get rid of it. You've also got your different hover state, focus state, and so on. They're available, and you've also got modifiers down the left-hand side. Now, there's tons of options here to customize things, and it's all pretty cool, and we're going to concentrate on that in a different video. For now, just knowing it's there, and we can reference those by simply using this little variable. Pretty cool. I should say class name or component name, not variable. Jumping into layouts, this is where things get a little bit more complex. This is where we can set up our rows, columns, and things for our grid layout. So you can customize this if you don't want to use the basic values. And the same goes for automatic columns, flex layouts. So if you want to make sure that everything is consistent and use flex or grid, you can use your framework to be able to handle that, to make sure all your spacing is the same, your layout's the same, and everything flows the way that you want it to. And again, we can customize this should you want to use something outside the starting point. Jumping into design, this is where we kind of have those little things that fall outside of core functions, or core styling and core classes and so on, into more of these sort of styling elements. So for example, like your radius, your drop shadows, borders, and so on. And again, you can see we've got variables inside here. We've got minimum and maximum values, your borders, your box shadows, your variables, your opacity settings, aspect ratios for your images, and so on. There's lots of options here, including image fit and so on. You kind of get the idea. And then if we look at other, this is basically anything that falls outside of that. So utility classes, so things like your display, your hidden, your overflow, and so on, your positioning for relative and absolute. Cursors, if you want to change those, your Z-index values. And again, we can create our own custom selector or variable groups. There's lots of options to expand this. And if you don't use any of these options, there are certain things inside you, and when you keep your framework as light as possible, get rid of them. You know, if you don't ever worry about Z-index, well, you can get rid of the entire group if you want to, or you can just get rid of any of the values inside there for the selectors. Same with the cursors. If you never change your cursors, get rid of it. Just saves a little bit of space, makes your CSS, your framework, a little bit lighter. Once you've done everything then, you can hit Save Changes to commit those changes. So we'll hit that to make sure that everything is saved. And if you want to preview your CSS, you can preview it, and then all of your CSS is listed inside here, at which point you can download it as an external CSS file, export it, copy the CSS, or you can copy it minified. And you see at the top, this will tell us the estimated size right now, and if you minify it, what it would be with compression and so on. So pretty cool to see that. But we've got everything set up. So now we've taken a look at what the framework does. How do we actually use it inside Bricks? Well, there's a couple of ways. So let me show you. So let's start with some really simple examples. Let's add in a section. You can see our section includes a container. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our container. We're going to come over to our style on the left-hand side. We're going to click our background color. And you can see there's all of our colors based upon what we set up inside the core framework. Now we can select any of these. For example, this first one, which is our primary. And if we take a look at the bottom, you can see this is telling us this is using a variable, and the variable name is primary. Choose a different one. This is primary L. So it's pretty cool to see how easy this is. So we set that background color inside there. Let's go over to our section, and let's do the same thing again. Let's select our section and select a different color. So we'll set this nice dark color. Now at the moment you can't really see anything because of the way this is scaling, but if we take a look in preview mode, you can see outside, which is our overall section. Inside is our container, and we set the different colors for each of these. So let's go back in. So you can see there's nothing really different there to just selecting a color, and it's not really taking advantage of a framework. Let's just say we want to select our container, and we're going to use it in a different way. We're going to come over into our CSS classes, and inside there, all of our classes are available to us from our core framework. So now, if you want to add some padding or some margin to the container, we can do it inside here. So let's start off with some margin. Type in margin. So inside there, you can see now we filtered things down to show the different margins available. So for example, we may want to say we want to have a large margin set to all 4 sides. Select that, and we now applied that global class to it. Now, if we take a quick look, you can see we have that padding or margin spaced around it. Pretty cool. Now let's go back. So that's the first thing. Now, we can stack more of these on top of each other. So let's go and add in some text into our container, just so we've got a heading inside there and a little bit of content. And now let's go and add another global class in. So let's select. This time we're going to add padding, and we're going to say we want to put extra large padding. So now we've applied padding and margin to that container element. And if we take a look, you can see it's showing us, and we can select either of these. And if we then open up the layout option, you can see these are now disabled. So we can't override them because we set this up, we use it in that class, we can't override them. If we deselect that class, so now we're just affecting the container itself and not using these classes or adjusting these classes, we can make changes here if we want to. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of using these classes, but you can override the options should you want to. Let's move on to our heading. Let's set some styling up on there and show you how you can work with this in various different ways. We'll select it, we'll come over to our typography, we'll set our color, and we'll set this to be one of our variables. So we've set the color. Now, if we come back to our content, you can see this is using H3 and it's been set up to be a certain size. Let's set this to H1, you can see it's bigger, H2, and so on. So this is picking up the styles that we set up inside Core Framework. We can modify this if we want to, because not all of your H1s may want to be the same size. So we may want to semantically set things up to have H1, H2, H3, and so on, but we may want to visually style them differently. So this is very easy to do in various different ways. We'll leave our HTML tag set to H1. We'll come over to our styles, and we can come into our font size, and we can change things inside here. So what we could do is we may want to make this smaller for this example, but still retain that H1. So what we could do is we can type in text, and we can say we want this to be text extra large. It's still a H1, and we've overridden that core framework style, and we changed it to a different size. That's as simple as that. Now you can change that from here. We could take it from there, and we could do it at the top as well. We could come into our classes. So again, we could do text inside here, and we can come down and we can say we want text, for example, 2XL. And you can see we've now set that up inside here as well. And we can, again, like I say, we can stack more things on here as well. So we may want to make them bold and so on. We can do it all here. But what this is hopefully showing you is how flexible all of this can actually be. We can use that core framework, and we can then use it in various different ways to either have global values set up that we use as defaults, and we can override them on an instance by instance basis if we want to. Pretty cool. Okay, so that's some of the real basics. Now again, like I say, if we take a quick look at this in a preview, you can see we've got our padding, our margins, and so on set up. So these are all really quite basic things. Let's come back to our container, and let's take a look at adding some more sort of visual style things. So for example, let's come back to the top, and let's say we want to apply a radius. So we'll say a radius of, for example, we'll say medium, so you can see it. And you can see now if we preview this, we've now got rounded corners set up on there. Simple as that. Want to apply a shadow? You can apply a shadow. You kind of get the idea. And you can see by using these options, we can stack more and more styles on top of each other onto a single element. It's very, very powerful when you start to use it. And once you kind of get used to all of this, everything just becomes a lot quicker to work with, because instead of having to go through a bunch of different parts of the interface, you can literally stay inside here and just start setting things up directly inside your global classes. Or if you want to, you can still come into these areas, for example, in our layout, and we can easily come in here, make sure no class is selected, and we can set up whatever variables we want. So again, I select those from here, and you can see I can adjust things on just the one size, for example, and I can override that core framework class system that's being used, or variable system that's being used. It's very, very powerful and very, very simple to work with. So let's move on to something just a little bit more complicated. Let's get rid of all of this. Let's just add a new container, and inside there, we're going to add in a div. And inside our div, we're just going to drop in an icon and set up some basic parameters. And let's duplicate this a couple of times. Let's come to our container. Our container, we're going to add some margin to this. And if we take a look at this on the front end, well, we kind of have a pile of boxes with some icons in. Whoop-de-doo. But we can go so much further. Let's say we want to apply a gap to these. Well, let's go to our container and let's just type in gap. And we'll say we want to have gap 3, well, let's go for 2XS. So we now have a gap in between each of our boxes. So now we have some margin around it. But what can we do now? Well, let's just say we want to start working with CSS Grid. We can do it. It's pretty simple. Let's come up and say column. And we'll say we want to have 3 columns. Boom, we now have a 3-column grid all laid out. If we switch this into responsive mode, we still have a 3x2 grid, which doesn't necessarily look great. So we can override that. We can start to use some modifiers on top of this kind of column setup. So for example, we may want to have just 2 columns on tablet or mobile. So we'll do columns -2, then we'll do 2 dashes, and we're going to use on S. And let me just explain what that does. That's basically saying that column 3 for everything other than small, in this case, is going to be your sort of mobile portrait. And then it says just use columns of 2 on there. So again, let's hit save. And now if we switch this over into mobile, you can see we now have a 2x3. Everything else is a 3x2. And we've got a responsive grid set up with no real effort whatsoever, just simply applying a couple of global classes to this container element with a bunch of divs inside it. It really is pretty simple. Don't like the gap, want to make it bigger? No problem at all. Let's come back out, delete that one, and we'll say gap. And this time we'll say we want to have something like a large gap between each of these. Pretty cool. Want to apply something like a corner radius to the div? Well, let's come in and just select the div, and we'll do radius. And we'll apply a small radius. And you can see we now have our first div has a radius applied to it, and everything else is being responsibly designed and laid out. It's really simple to do. Now, let's say you want to get a bit more complicated with this. You want to set things up so this actually goes over 2 rows. Again, we can do all of that just using our core framework. We'll make sure our first div is selected, and what we're going to do is we're going to say row span, and we'll say how many rows we want this to span. So we'll say we've got 2, and we'll say set that to 2. Now you'll notice that we get this gap in there. All we need to do to deal with that is come into our layout for this first div, and we're going to come down to the height, making sure we deselect any of our classes, come to our height and set this to be 100%. And boom, there we go. That's now been set up. So again, let's just go and save this, preview it, and we now have a CSS grid with our first one taking up 2 rows. We have 3 columns. If we switch this into different views, we can get different size layouts. And I think you kind of get the idea where I'm coming from with this. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to working with frameworks. Whether you're working with WordPress in a framework, whether you're working Bricks in a framework, whether you want to use Core, ACSS, whatever you want to use, they all do fundamentally the same thing. And what they do is they make our lives as web designers way, way easier because the framework does all the heavy lifting. We just need to put in the relevant variables, the relevant classes to be able to lay things out the way you want and let the framework handle all the things behind the scenes, like your scaling, handling all of your responsive modes, all those kinds of things. Now, this is what I wanted to cover just to give you a taste of what could be done. But as always, if you want more, let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to know what you want me to teach you. And if there's enough people interested, I'll create some more content on it. As always, all applicable links for everything I've covered are in the description down below. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.